I call a member for Balmain.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker. I rise to address the Electricity Supply Amendment Bushfire Hazard Reduction Bill 2014 on behalf of the Greens. It's interesting we hear about 1050 tonight, one of the most ridiculously incompetent pieces of legislation, which is actually an urban land clearing policy.
That's a disgraceful allegation.
You know it was a dud.
No, it's not a dud.
It was a dud.
I'm in favour of it.
You're in favour of the objectives, but it was a dud in terms of implementation.
Certainly was not.
Mr Temporary
Saves
Speaker,
lives, Jamie.
we've had people raising 1050. We've had people raising 1050, and so he wants me to get through the time. We've had people raising 1050, and Mr Temporary Speaker, my concern is this legislation may well add to the problem in the future. The bill extends the powers of network operators to intervene to remove fire hazards on privately owned land. We've heard, of course, that the legislation was introduced in response to a $200 million class action against Endeavour, brought by 400 Blue Mountains residents. Brought by 400 Blue Mountains residents, who claim the network operator failed to remove a dangerous tree. Now, Mr Temporary Speaker, electricity assets can be owned by both network operators and private operators, and the network operators own the street-based poles and wires infrastructure. Privately owned electricity assets generally start at and include the first low voltage power on a landowner's property. Legal responsibility for maintaining this electricity infrastructure, including addressing potential bushfire risk, lies with the respective owner. The government is claiming that some private operators are failing to address potential risks on their property in an appropriate and timely manner, increasing the local bushfire risks.
It's only a sickly sweet haze over here.
Well, how many bushfires are in Sydney
Member for
areas where people are
Balmain, member
chopping
for
trees down at the
Balmain,
moment?
put your comments through the chair, please.
Mr Temporary Speaker, I ask you the question. Mr Temporary Speaker, vegetational removal. Where the power lines and poles are privately owned, the electricity network operators can direct the owners to take or prune remove trees that pose a risk to electricity assets or are a bushfire risk. This is required to be done in a, quote, reasonable time frame. In an emergency situation, only is a network operator able to intervene and trim or remove trees. The operator has to pay for this work unless it can be proven that the private owners planted the trees knowing they could pose a risk to electricity assets. Similar powers are given to the operators to remove any, quote, structure or thing, end quote, that may pose a similar risk, and of course that's part 5. Now, disconnect electricity supply. This can be done in order to avert the threat of fire or other dangers to people or property. That's in the regulation. Now, this bill, Mr Temporary Speaker, would give network operators new powers, and I wanted to address these matters clearly. Number 1, it will impose a legal time frame of 60 days for the required work to be done. This must be done in writing and requires that owners notify the networks in 30 days. If the owner does not respond within 30 days, the network operator can enter private land to undertake the work. 2, in the case where a network provider enters a private land without permission, this bill enables them to charge private owners for the work undertaken, regardless of whether they consent. 3, direct private owners to undertake works not only on vegetation and structures, but also aerial consumer mains. And 4, and importantly, to disregard environmental protections. So the work undertaken as a result of this bill can be done despite any restrictions outlined in any other laws when it comes to native vegetation. Threatened species conservation, national parks, all of those issues are not relevant. Currently, the power to remove vegetation under the electricity supply does not apply to a tree within a protected area or any tree that falls under the heritage, national parks and wildlife environmental planning laws. So, Mr Temporary Speaker, you can understand our concern about this particular matter, and that's why we raised it today. Number 1, I'd like to address our concern specifically in the bill. Number 1, we feel it may well be unnecessary. The network operators already have far-reaching powers to remove vegetation and structures on private property that pose a bushfire risk. What this legislation does is strip away any consumer or environmental protections to allow network operators to remove vegetation more quickly with less oversight. We're concerned that while Section 52E of the bill allows for private owners to lodge a dispute or complaint about the direction from the network operator with the Energy and Water Ombudsman, it fails to make clear whether such a dispute will put a freeze in the 60-day time limit for the work to be done. It may be the case that if the matter is not resolved with the Ombudsman within 60 days, then a network operator will enter the property regardless and remove the alleged bushfire risk. So the question, Mr Temporary Speaker, through you to the Minister is, can the Minister outline, just to clarify the situation, any dispute or review mechanisms available to private landholders who want to challenge the network operator's notification that work must be undertaken? Now, how does that fit with the 60-day time limit? Just so that we're clear on what that actually means. Thirdly, by giving the network operators the ability to force households to remove bushfire risks and then charging them for the work if they refuse to comply, privately owned network operators could significantly outsource their maintenance costs, and that's something that we wouldn't like to see. This could have an adverse impact on households that are already struggling with high power bills. The bill includes a hardship provision, however. The parameters of this requirement have not been made entirely clear. We are also concerned, and we look forward to hearing the government's response to any concerns that it may encourage the network operators to force private owners to remove vegetation that may not pose a real risk, as a financial incentive to look at the least cost options would be removed. Finally, it removes all requirement for the network operators to take into account existing environmental laws, Mr Temporary Speaker. This could have a significant impact on natural bushland in New South Wales, which is already being pushed to the brink, as we know, by deforestation and development. While specific trees that pose a particular risk can help avoid catastrophic fires that ravage New South Wales native forests, stripping all environmental protections may result in unnecessary environmental damage with little benefit for at-risk communities and, of course, ecosystems. The lack of oversight or regulatory control over the network operators means there will be no way to access the ecological damage caused by giving the network operator free rein to ignore environmental laws. Mr Temporary Speaker, of course we're all concerned about bushfires. All of us have shared and been sympathetic, shared the feelings of devastation and loss by those that have suffered the impact from bushfires. We've already seen the government's botched implementation of the 1050 laws, which we know has had consequences which have been far outside have been far outside. Read the newspaper. Have a look at what's been going on. And the concern, Mr Temporary Speaker, you should get a subscription, you might learn something. Mr Temporary Speaker, the concern here is, of course, we want to protect people and property from bushfires. We look at the CRC, and the work the Bushfires CRC doing has been fantastic in terms of many elements of looking at the causes, the ways to abate fires, the way to minimise impact and so on. Our concern is, number one, that with some clarity around the interaction between the 60 days, as I mentioned before, the 60 days and the dispute resolution, and our concern that the environmental standards which currently apply will be stripped away. The potential imposition on the private households or private owners, and the cost shifting in effect by network operators. So, Mr Temporary Speaker, we express our concerns about this bill. We obviously are committed to ensuring bushfire mitigation, but it's important that we balance this with environmental protection, species protection, and also protection of consumers and those who are subject, those who are subject to these significant powers. Thank you.
I think